Stop me when it's too much.
Stop me when it's too much, the lonely cowboy murmured to the giant virgin mail order bride. But she broke him first by making him fall in love. Stop me when it's too much, the lonely cowboy murmured, his hand trembling on her shoulder as they sat on the marriage bed, both knowing what this night was supposed to bring. Ezra Thornwell's voice was raw with fear and longing as he touched his giant mail-order bride for the first time. This virgin woman who made him feel both terrified and desperately alive. Minerva Blackwood sat frozen in her cream wedding dress, her heart pounding, because no man had ever looked at her with desire instead of disgust, and now this lonely cowboy was asking permission to love her body the way she'd dreamed but never believed possible. But when his rough fingers traced down her arm with a tenderness that made her breath catch, when his eyes met hers with a hunger that saw her as a woman, not a freak, the giant virgin bride realized something dangerous. She didn't want him to stop. She wanted to break him first, by making him fall so deeply in love that he'd forget every wall he'd built around his shattered heart. But could a lonely cowboy survive the overwhelming passion of a giant virgin bride who'd been starving for touch her entire life? And when their bodies finally came together, would too much destroy them both, or heal them? What happens when a man afraid to feel meets a woman who's never been felt? But that moment, that sacred, terrifying moment, hadn't happened yet. To understand how Ezra Thornwell and Minerva Blackwood ended up on that bed, trembling with equal parts fear and desperate hope, we need to go back 3 months. Back to the day when a lonely cowboy's desperation collided with a giant woman's last shred of hope. Back to Redemption Ridge Station, where the afternoon sun painted everything gold, and where Ezra stood on the platform with his heart hammering like it might burst right through his ribs. He'd sent that letter 6 weeks ago, in a moment of weakness after old Silas found him talking to his dead wife's grave again. The foreman had looked at him with those sad, knowing eyes and said, "Boy, you're dying inside. Your heart's still beating, but you ain't living." So Ezra had written to the matrimonial agency in Philadelphia. Not because he wanted love, God no. He couldn't survive that kind of pain again. But because the silence in his house had become a living thing that was slowly suffocating him. The train shrieked into the station, belching black smoke that stung his eyes and made them water. At least that's what he told himself. It wasn't tears. He didn't cry anymore. Hadn't cried since the day he buried Patience and their baby girl 6 years ago, since the day his own family looked at him with blame in their eyes because he hadn't gotten the doctor fast enough through that blizzard. Passengers started climbing down, a fat merchant wiping sweat from his face, 2 dusty cowboys who looked like trouble, a family with 3 squalling children. And then she appeared. Lord have mercy. Ezra's breath just stopped in his chest. She descended those train steps so carefully, like she was afraid the whole station might collapse under her weight. And when her feet touched the platform, she stood there looking lost and terrified and impossibly huge. 6'4" if she was an inch, with shoulders broader than most men he knew, hands that looked strong enough to snap fence posts, and a body that was perfectly proportioned, just built on a scale that made his mind struggle to process what his eyes were seeing. She wore a simple gray traveling dress that strained at the seams, trying to contain all that woman, and a bonnet that couldn't quite hide the mass of dark, chestnut hair piled beneath it. But it was her face that hit him hardest. Strong jawline, high cheekbones that could have been carved from marble, and eyes the color of honey that darted across the platform like a cornered animal searching for the predator. Those eyes held something that made Ezra's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. Fear. Pure, bone-deep fear. The same look he'd seen in horses that had been beaten too many times. Behind him, the whispers started like poison spreading through water. Old Mrs. Pettigrew gasped so loud half the platform heard it. Young Billy Lawson laughed outright until his father smacked him upside the head. The livery owner muttered something about circus freaks, and Ezra felt his jaw clench so hard his teeth ached. Mr. Thornwell. Her voice cut through the noise, and it shocked him. Soft, musical, like she'd spent years learning to make herself sound smaller than the impossible. She was looking at him now, those honey eyes meeting his for just a second, before dropping to her worn shoes like she'd been trained to never hold a man's gaze too long. Miss Blackwood. He touched his hat brim, his throat suddenly dry as desert dust. Up close, she was even more overwhelming. He had to tilt his head back slightly just to meet her eyes, and that felt strange and unsettling, and somehow right in a way that terrified him. She swallowed hard, her large hands twisting the handle of her carpet bag until her knuckles went white. I understand if you've changed your mind. The agency didn't tell you about my condition. I can find work in town or take the next train back. You don't owe me anything. Her voice cracked on that last word, and Ezra saw her blink rapidly, fighting back tears with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd cried too many times in public and learned it only made things worse. Something hot and fierce flared in his chest. Anger. Not at her, never at her, but at every person who'd ever made this woman apologize for existing. I don't change my mind, he said, and the words came out harder than he meant them to. He watched her flinch, saw her shoulders curve inward like she was trying to fold herself into something less. Something the world could swallow without choking. Something acceptable. And damn it all to hell, he couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand watching another living thing make itself small because the world was too cruel and stupid to see value in anything different. He reached for her bag. Her hand shot out instinctively. I can carry it, sir. It's quite heavy. But his fingers had already closed around the handle. It was heavy. Lord, what did she pack? Bricks. But he hefted it anyway, turning toward his wagon without waiting to see if she'd follow. She did. He heard her footsteps on the wooden platform, heavy and deliberate, each one echoing like a judgment she'd heard 1,000 times before. Each step saying, too big, too much, too wrong. The ride to his ranch stretched 15 miles through Wyoming grassland that rolled like ocean waves frozen in gold and green. Ezra kept his eyes on the road, hyper-aware of her beside him on the wagon bench, taking up space in a way his delicate patience never had. Patience had been tiny, barely 5'2", fitting perfectly under his arm like God designed her specifically for him. This woman was an entirely different creation, solid as oak, unmovable as mountain stone, real in a way that felt almost offensive after 6 years of living with ghosts and memories that grew softer and less substantial every day. The silence between them grew thick and uncomfortable. Ezra didn't know what to say. What did you say to a woman you'd bought through a letter? A woman who looked like she could probably lift his horse if she had a mind to. He snuck glances at her from the corner of his eye. She sat perfectly still, spine straight, hands folded in her lap in a way that screamed years of training. Probably learned young that taking up space invited punishment. But then her head turned slightly, and he saw her profile soften. It's beautiful, she whispered, so quiet he almost missed it under the wagon wheels creaking and the horses snorting. Your land. He followed her gaze. She was staring at the grasslands, the distant mountains still capped with snow even in late May, the way the afternoon sun painted everything in shades of amber and gold. And on her face, that strong, unusual face that the world had probably told her was ugly 1,000 times, was something he hadn't expected to see. Wonder. Pure, unguarded joy at something as simple as open sky and grass and mountains, like she was seeing heaven for the first time and couldn't quite believe she was allowed to look at it. Her honey eyes were wide, almost childlike, and her lips, full lips that curved naturally upward at the corners, had parted slightly in what could only be called awe. Something shifted in Ezra's chest, subtle, like a key turning in a lock that had rusted shut 6 years ago. "It'll do," he muttered, but his voice came out softer than he intended. He kept watching her from the corner of his eye the rest of the way home, watching the way she drank in every detail of his land like a woman dying of thirst who'd finally found water, watching the way the wind pulled strands of chestnut hair loose from her bonnet, watching the way she unconsciously leaned forward slightly, as if trying to get closer to all that beauty. And he found himself wondering what kind of life this woman had lived that made empty grassland and distant mountains look like paradise. 3 weeks passed like a fever dream Ezra couldn't wake from and wasn't sure he wanted to. Minnie, he'd started calling her Minnie after she'd shyly admitted everyone back east called her that before the teasing made her insist on Minerva, moved through his house like spring after a brutal winter. She cooked meals that actually had flavor, not just fuel. She hummed while working, low tuneless melodies that made the suffocating silence finally breathable. She never once asked about the locked room upstairs where Patience's things gathered dust. But it was the small things destroying his carefully built walls. The way she talked to his horses like treasured friends, her voice dropping into gentle murmurs that calmed even the skittish gelding. The way she'd fixed the pump he'd been meaning to repair for 2 years, her enormous fingers surprisingly delicate with the mechanism. The way she laughed when she cracked her head on the doorframe again, rubbing the spot and saying, "Well, least I'm consistent." Patience had never laughed at herself. Patience had been perfect, poised, proper. Minnie was beautifully imperfect, and it terrified him how much he looked forward to supper, just to watch her face light up over successful biscuits. This particular evening, she'd outdone herself. Beef stew, rich with vegetables from the garden she'd somehow resurrected, fresh bread, apple pie from cellar preserves. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," Ezra said, reaching for seconds. It wasn't trouble. Her smile transformed her entire face, made her beautiful in ways the world was too blind to see. "I like cooking for someone who actually eats. My stepfather used to." She stopped abruptly, that smile dying like someone snuffed a candle. "Used to what?" "Nothing." She stood quickly, nearly knocking over her chair, and her hand brushed his shoulder as she moved to clear dishes. The contact was brief, innocent, but she jerked back like she'd touched fire. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Stop me when it's too much. When I'm too much. I know I take up space. I'm too loud, too—" "Minnie." Her name felt strange and right on his tongue. "Sit down." She hesitated, those honey eyes wide with hope and terror. "Please." She sat slowly, making herself small as someone her size could manage. Ezra struggled for words. He'd never been good at this, even before Patience died. "You sing," he said finally. "When you think I'm out with the cattle, I hear you from the barn." Her face went scarlet. "I'll stop." "Don't." The word came out desperate. "The house hasn't had music in 6 years." She stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. A single tear traced down her cheek. "And you don't take up too much space," he continued, each word feeling like pulling arrows from his own flesh. "This house has been too empty too long. I've been too empty too long." He met her eyes. "I like having you here. I need you to know that." Her smile came tremulous but genuine. "I like being here, Ezra." His name in her voice, like absolution. That night, lying alone in his bed, Ezra stared at darkness and realized he was feeling again. And feeling was the most dangerous thing he'd ever done. The trouble erupted on a Saturday because trouble in Redemption Ridge always came on Saturdays when whiskey flowed and men's worst impulses ran free. Ezra had brought Minnie to town for supplies, her first trip since arriving 2 months ago. She'd been nervous, he could tell, but she'd lifted her chin and walked beside him with quiet dignity, even as every eye followed them like wolves tracking prey. They were loading flour sacks when Thaddeus Ashford swaggered over, his father's money evident in every stitch of his fancy clothes. 3 friends flanked him, all wearing the cruel smiles of men who'd never faced real consequences. "Well, well," Thaddeus drawled, making a show of looking Minnie up and down like she was livestock. "Thornwell, I heard you sent for a mail-order bride, but nobody mentioned you ordered from a circus. What's next? The bearded lady?" His friends erupted in laughter. Ezra's hands clenched into fists, but Minnie's gentle touch on his arm stopped him. "It's fine," she murmured, and those 2 words broke something fundamental in his chest. "I'm used to it." Used to it. How many years of cruelty had taught her to accept hatred as natural as breathing? "It ain't fine," Ezra said, his voice low and dangerous. He stepped toward Thaddeus. "You want to insult someone, insult me. But you speak about my wife with respect, or we're gonna have a serious problem." The word hung in the air like smoke. Wife. Minnie's sharp intake of breath told him she'd heard. They hadn't married yet. She was still just the hired bride. But in that moment, with the whole town watching, Ezra Thornwell made his choice. Thaddeus's smile turned ugly. "Wife? You actually married that freak? God, Thornwell, I knew you were desperate, but—" Ezra's fist connected with Thaddeus's jaw before the bastard could finish. The fight was brief, but vicious. Thaddeus's friends jumped in, but Ezra fought with 6 years of bottled rage suddenly uncorked. When Minnie waded in, grabbing 2 men by their collars and bodily lifting them away from Ezra like they weighed nothing, the crowd gasped in shock and fear. Sheriff Morrison broke it up, but the damage was done. The ride home was silent until halfway back. Then Minnie spoke, her voice thick with tears. "You shouldn't have done that. I wasn't going to stand there and you called me your wife." She turned to him, and the pain in her eyes gutted him completely. "Why would you do that? The Ashfords own half this town. They'll destroy you now. All because of me. You think I care what they— I care," the words burst out. "I care because you're a good man who deserves better than a giant freak who'll ruin everything." She was crying openly now, her large body shaking with sobs she'd probably held back for years. Ezra pulled the wagon to a stop, turned to her, and did something he hadn't done in 6 years. He reached for her. "Come here." She shook her head, trying to make herself smaller, but he was persistent, gently pulling until she finally collapsed against him, this huge, strong woman folding herself into his arms. Crying into his shoulder while he held her and felt his own walls finally, completely crumbling. "I meant it," he whispered into her hair. "Wife, that's what I want." She pulled back, searching his face with those honey eyes. "Ezra." "Stop me when it's too much," he said, echoing her words back. "But I'm telling you anyway. I love you, Minnie Blackwood, and I don't give a damn what this town thinks." But the next morning, Ezra woke to an empty house. The silence was wrong, not the old silence he'd grown accustomed to, but a new, terrible absence. Her room was empty, bed made with military precision, and on the pillow sat a folded note. His hands shook as he read, "Dear Ezra, I convinced myself I could be selfish, that I could stay and let you sacrifice everything for someone like me. But Cornelius Ashford came yesterday while you were checking fences. He offered me passage east and money if I left quietly. I'm not taking his money, but I am leaving. Not because of him, but because I love you too much to watch this town destroy you. You called me your wife, and it was the most beautiful moment of my life. That's enough. Thank you for teaching me that someone could look at me and see something other than a mistake. Yours always, Minnie." The note fell from his fingers. She'd left to protect him, to save him from loving her. And every wall he'd built, every defense he'd carefully constructed, shattered completely. Ezra Thornwell fell to his knees and wept, gut-wrenching sobs from the deepest part of his soul. He cried for Patience and the baby. He cried for 6 wasted years. But mostly he cried for Minnie, who'd made him feel alive only to sacrifice her happiness because she believed she was too much. Old Silas found him there. "Boy, the morning stage leaves in 20 minutes. I got your horse saddled. You planning to let her go, or you planning to do something?" Ezra looked up through blurred eyes. "The whole town, to hell with the town," Silas interrupted. "You love her? More than my own life? Then get on that damn horse." Ezra rode harder than he'd ever ridden, his horse's hooves eating distance to town. He reached the station just as the stage prepared to depart, passengers loaded, driver gathering reins. "Minnie!" He threw himself off his horse. "Minnie Blackwood!" The coach door opened. She emerged slowly, eyes red from crying, face a mask of confusion and hope and fear. "Don't go," he said, voice breaking. "Please, God, don't go. Ezra, I have to. No." He fell to his knees right there in the dirt, in front of the whole town, in front of the Ashfords, and everyone who'd ever whispered. "You told me to stop when it's too much. Well, stop me now." He pulled his mother's ring from his pocket with shaking hands. "I'm a broken man, Minnie. Been broken 6 years. But you didn't break me worse. You broke me open. You let light back in. And losing you would destroy me worse than losing Patience ever could, because this time I'd know exactly what I'm giving up." Tears streamed down her face. "You're not too much," he said fiercely. "You're everything. Your strength and kindness and joy and every good thing I thought I'd never deserve. Marry me. Not because I'm lonely, but because I love you so completely I can't imagine breathing without you." Silence stretched forever. Then Minnie stepped down from that stage and pulled him up into her arms, those strong, enormous arms that made him feel safer than he'd ever felt. "Yes," she whispered against his hair. "Yes, you stubborn, beautiful man." 2 months later, Ezra woke to find his wife watching sunrise through their bedroom window, her hand resting on the slight swell of her belly. He wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Stop me when it's too much," she said softly. He kissed her shoulder. "Never. You're never too much. You're exactly enough." For the first time in 6 years, Ezra Thornwell believed in second chances. And in the barn, old Silas just smiled and muttered, "About damn time."